92% of people spend their entire lives fighting the same 3 battles and never realize it's the same war. Desire pulling you forward, anger pushing others away, and a quiet confusion about why nothing ever feels like enough. The Buddha gave these 3 a single name, the fires. Here's what's remarkable. Once you can see all 3 clearly, their grip on you loosens. Not someday, almost immediately. Today, I'll show you exactly what these 3 fires look like inside your own daily life, and why the place they burn brightest might be your greatest teacher. In northern India, along the banks of the Ganges River, there was a grove called the Deer Park. Deer grazed quietly in the grass, and a gentle wind moved through the trees. 5 men sat near a fire there, gazing silently up at the sky. The evening light stretched long shadows across the ground. Then in the distance, a figure appeared, walking slowly toward them. His footsteps were calm, and yet something about him felt different. The same face, yes, but the air around him had changed completely, as though he had become someone else entirely. The 5 men exchanged glances, the fire flickered, and somewhere in the trees, a deer disappeared into the shadows. One of the men rose to his feet without knowing why. Another found that the harsh words he had prepared dissolved before they could reach his lips. A third simply bowed, not out of habit, but because something in him had recognized, before his mind could name it, that what was approaching was no longer just a man. The figure did not hurry. He walked as a river walks, without effort, without destination, arriving only because arriving was what the moment asked of it. The man walking toward them was the Buddha, someone who had just awakened. These 5 men had once practiced alongside him, enduring years of harsh, painful discipline together. But one day, they watched him stop the ascetic life and accept food. They were devastated. He gave up, they told each other. He took the easy road, and so they left, making their way to this grove. Now seeing him approach, the 5 made a quiet agreement among themselves. No greetings, no eye contact, no offered seat. They would simply ignore him. Their conviction was that firm that he had fallen. But when he stood before them, they found themselves rising to their feet. No one had said a word. Their hands moved on their own. Their feet moved on their own. Before they knew it, a seat had been prepared, water had been offered. There was something in his stillness they could not resist. The Buddha sat down. He looked at each of them in turn. "Friends," he said quietly, "I have found something, and I must share it with you." One of the 5 spoke up. "You abandoned the path. You gave in to comfort. What could you possibly have found?" The Buddha nodded, not defensively, not with irritation, just a slow, steady nod. "I understand why it looked that way," he said, "but what I let go of was the extreme of self-punishment. And the other extreme, the pursuit of pleasure, is also not the way. What I walked was the path between them. And what is that?" "Let me speak to you about fire," the Buddha said. He gestured toward the small flame burning between them. "You can see this fire, but there is another fire you cannot see. Right now, in this very moment, 3 fires are burning inside every human being." The 5 men sat quietly. "The first is the fire of craving, the wanting, for things, for recognition, for love, for more, always more. This fire does not go out when you get what you want. Feed it, and it only grows larger." One of the men whispered almost to himself, "I know that fire." "The second," the Buddha continued, "is the fire of anger. The I can't stand this, the how dare they, the why me. This fire moves fast. It spreads in an instant, scorching everything around it. And in the end, the one it burns most is you. When we are angry, we believe we are wielding something powerful, but we are the ones most deeply aflame." Another man quietly looked down. "The third fire is the fire of unawareness, and this one is the most dangerous of all, because it burns without you knowing it's there. You don't realize you're craving. You don't realize you're in anger. You are consumed, and yet you feel nothing unusual. It is like being in a dark room and not knowing the room is dark. Then what do we do?" one of them asked, leaning forward. The Buddha paused. The wind moved through the grove. The flame bent gently to one side. "First, notice that the fire is there." "That's all?" That is the beginning. A person who does not know they are on fire will keep burning. A person who knows can at least go looking for water. As the night deepened, the 5 men leaned closer and closer. A deer called out somewhere in the dark. The fire shrank to embers, and still the Buddha's words continued. This was the very first teaching he ever gave, spoken in a deer park to 5 old friends beside a fading fire. And those 5 men who had turned their backs on him, who had agreed not to rise, not to bow, not to offer so much as a glance, they became his first disciples, ordained before the night was through. Sometimes the teaching does not arrive as we expect it to, not from a throne, not with fanfare, but in a clearing in the dark, from someone we had already decided to dismiss. Craving, anger, unawareness. In Buddhism, these 3 are called the 3 poisons. The word poison might sound dramatic, but a poison doesn't strike you all at once. It moves slowly, quietly, without announcing itself. A little at a time. You don't collapse suddenly, you weaken, gradually day after day. Let me pause here for a moment. When we suffer, most of us look outward for the cause. That person, that situation, that event. We reach for something outside ourselves to explain the pain. But Buddhism interrupts that search with a single question. Is your suffering coming from not having enough? Or is it coming from a fixed idea about how things should be, and the pain of reality not matching that idea? That question is the heart of the 3 poisons. The suffering of craving doesn't actually come from a lack of things. It comes from the belief that I am incomplete without this, a fixed, rigid frame laid over life. The same is true of anger. At the root of "I can't forgive them" is a template. This is how it should have been. Every time reality fails to fit that template, the flame rises. We aren't suffering because reality is wrong. We are suffering because we keep pressing a fixed mold onto reality, and then feeling the friction of the mismatch. And the 3rd poison, unawareness, is the deepest of all. Buddhism teaches that before craving arises, before anger flares, there is first the state of not seeing. Without awareness, we feel the want, we feel the resistance, and we act on them. Saying things, doing things, hurting others, hurting ourselves, all without ever understanding why. There is a Buddhist teaching called the 12 links of dependent origination. It says that suffering does not arise from a single point. It describes a chain, and at the very beginning of that chain is unawareness. Not malice, not weakness, just not seeing. And here is one more thing worth sitting with. What is I, exactly? Buddhism says that what we call myself is not a fixed solid thing. It is 5 shifting elements: the body, sensation, perception, impulse, and consciousness, temporarily gathered together in this moment, giving rise to the sense of me. It is not that a permanent I exists and that I gets angry. It is that the conditions for anger arise, and in that moment, the feeling of I am angry appears. Not I am angry, but rather, anger is arising, here now. That single shift in how you see it creates a little distance, not from yourself, but from the fire. The Buddha told those 5 men, do not strain to get rid of the fires. Even the effort to destroy the 3 poisons can become its own form of clinging. If unawareness is the root problem, then the answer is not force, it is simply seeing, not throwing the fire away, but noticing it, just looking. That was the seed of everything spoken that night in the deer park, and perhaps that is why the deer did not run. They had no agenda about what the night should be, no template for how a man sitting beneath trees ought to sound. They simply stood there, ears still, in the open field of what was actually happening. So what do these 3 fires look like in our lives today? The first scene is one many of us know from work. You worked hard for a promotion. You believed you deserved it. And then a junior colleague got there first. Something ignites in your chest. Resentment, disbelief, a sense of injustice. That feeling is real. There's no need to deny it. But if you look a little closer, you'll find something underneath it. The belief that, I worked this hard, so this is what should have happened. A template. A rule you made without quite realizing you'd made it. Craving and anger often arrive together. When wanting goes unmet, resistance flares, and unawareness makes the whole chain invisible. So it just feels like, I'm just angry with no sense of what's actually driving it. But if you shift the question, if instead of why is this happening to me, you ask what fixed expectation is this anger protecting, something small changes. The view opens just a little. The second scene is in our relationships. You loved someone, you hoped they would show up in a particular way, say a certain thing, offer a certain kind of care, and they didn't. Disappointment turned to hurt, hurt turned to anger. This too is the fire of craving, the hunger for love, for recognition, for being truly seen, and none of that is wrong in itself. But when we hold an unwavering image of this person should be a certain way, every moment they fall short of that image becomes a new wound. Buddhism speaks of dependent origination, the idea that nothing and no one exists in isolation. I only arise in relationship with others. The person in front of you is living within their own web of causes and conditions, arriving at this moment shaped by everything they've been through. They should be different is in a way our own constructed idea of who they are, laid over a person who is simply here, shaped by their own story. When that view softens, the pain in a relationship can start to look a little different. The third scene is smaller, and maybe the most familiar. You pick up your phone, you scroll, someone's life looks enviable, something stirs, a wanting, a quiet dissatisfaction, a sense that you should have more, be more, look different. You look up, and 30 minutes have passed. This is what the fire of craving looks like in the modern world. It never finishes. You reach the thing you wanted, and then there's another thing. Satisfaction is brief, the thirst returns almost immediately. This isn't because you haven't gotten enough. It's because the belief that there is always something missing has no bottom. To borrow the Buddha's words, the problem is not that there isn't enough fuel. The problem is that we keep feeding the fire and calling that living. There is a story of a monk who, after years of practice, was asked what had changed in him. He paused, then said, "The fires still come, but now I see the wood in my hands before I throw it." That gap between the impulse and the action, between the wanting and the feeding, is not nothing. So what can you actually do starting today? Nothing complicated, just one thing: notice. The first thing the Buddha taught in the Deer Park, at its very core, was this act of noticing. The deepest of the three poisons is unawareness. So the beginning of the path is simply this: making that fog a little thinner. Here is something specific to try. Today, if you feel yourself getting irritated at someone, or feel a strong pull towards something you absolutely have to have, before you act on it, pause for just one moment and ask yourself quietly, which fire is burning right now? Is it craving, anger, or is it so unclear that you can't even tell? You don't need an answer. Simply noticing, anger just came, is enough. Awareness is not a fire extinguisher. It doesn't put the flame out immediately, but it gives you eyes to see what fire you're standing in. The Buddha taught his students to practice this in everything, while walking, while eating, while speaking. Just quietly watching what is happening inside me right now. This is called right mindfulness, the continuous, gentle noticing of what is, as it is. No special place needed, no special tools, just a willingness to look at what color your emotions are in this moment. I won't promise that things will transform if you keep at it, but this much is true. What you never look at, you will never see, and what you cannot see, cannot change. One more thing, if you're willing. Tonight, before you sleep, take a few quiet moments to review your day. Was there something you wanted? Was there something you couldn't stand? Just gently check in. No self-criticism needed. Simply, all three fires were moving today, weren't they? Just witnessing it. That quiet act of looking, repeated day after day, may slowly begin to thin the fog of not seeing. Because the change, when it comes, rarely arrives like a great awakening. It comes the way dawn comes, so gradually that you cannot point to the moment darkness became light. Only that, at some point, you are standing in a brighter place than before. A monk I once heard speak described it this way. After years of practice, he didn't stop getting angry. He simply began to notice the anger one breath sooner each time. That one breath, he said, was everything. That small gap between the spark and the flame is where your freedom lives. Of the three fires, which one burns most brightly inside you today? The fire of wanting, the fire of I can't stand this, Or do you find yourself not quite sure what's burning at all? There's no rush. Just pause for a moment and look. A farmer once told me he spent 40 years certain it was drought that ruined his crops, only to find one quiet morning that he had been blocking his own irrigation channel with stones he'd carried since childhood. Sometimes the smoke and the source are further apart than we imagine, and sometimes we've tended the fire so faithfully for so long that we've forgotten we were the ones who first struck the match. The 3 poisons we explored today are the very heart of what Buddhism calls defilements, and we took a closer look at that broader teaching in a previous episode. They say that on the night in the deer park, the 5 men listened until dawn. As the fire faded to coals and the forest began to lighten, one of them said quietly, "I have spent all this time trying to put out the fires outside of me." The teaching of the 3 poisons is not complicated, but it is easy to forget. In the busyness of daily life, we walk through all 3 fires without realizing we're in them. That isn't something to be ashamed of. The Buddha said unawareness is simply where human beings begin. What matters is the moment you notice. Ah, I was craving again. Ah, I was in anger again. That single quiet recognition opens a small window in the fog. What you'll see through it, that changes each time. The fire may not go out, but there is a difference between someone who knows they are on fire and someone who doesn't. Even standing in the same flame, the night passes a little differently. Thank you for being here and for listening all the way through. I hope the rest of your day holds a little more stillness than it did before. May this recognition be enough, for now, the way even a single lamp lit in a dark room does not push the darkness out but makes it possible to see where you are standing. And perhaps that is all any of us can do tonight. Not to arrive somewhere, but simply to know where we are. Like Kandana, the first of the 5 to understand, who did not leap to his feet or cry out, but only turned to the man beside him and nodded once, slowly, in the dark. Whose face came to mind while you were listening today? One story a day. In a week, your words will change. In a month, your eyes will change. In a year, the same world will look completely different.